The Three Down Greencast is brought to you by the Pile of Bones Brewing Company. New taproom now open at Sask Drive and Cameron in Regina. Welcome to the Three Down Greencast. I'm Joel Gasson with my co-host. We'll call him that this week, I guess. John Fraser. John.
Woohoo!
And it's pretty impossible to deny at this point that there has to be some kind of grand master plan afoot by either the CFL or some higher power that we do not know about that is clearly trying to help the Saskatchewan Roughriders in 2019, just like they do every other year, but especially this year, given the circumstances that we have recently learned. Not only can these powers control the weather, but they can also put banned substances into the league's, arguably the league's best player's body.
No, and you're absolutely right. There's only one solution. It's not that Andrew Harris has possibly been doing illegal drugs this whole time and figured he'd been tested three times and wasn't going to get tested again. It could only be the most wild of conspiracy theories that obviously the CFL wants the Riders to win this Grey Cup. So you know what, everybody? You know what? Let's just cancel the podcast for the rest of the year. Let's cancel the season for the rest of the year. Let's just go and have a parade. Let's just go down Dudney with the Grey Cup. Let's do it in August. Parade will be nice because clearly the CFL controls the weather and controls what Andrew Harris does.
Yes.
At every step of the way.
Yes, and they've made sure that they loaded the schedule up with weaker opponents to this point to make sure that the Riders would have a good record coming into this game so we can declare the season over.
Yes, absolutely. See, it's funny, though. I do think that there would be some Rider fan crazy enough someplace if they saw Andrew Harris working out in the gym to just, discreetly, sneak in one of those gas station male enhancement pills into, his pre-workout and just walk away.
Maybe,
it's funny. There's lots of talk about conspiracies to have the CFL win it, but I could see a Rider fan out there crazy enough to do exactly that. And don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it could be a thing.
I mean, I guess if there was any fan base in the CFL, it might be the craziest of Rider fans, but it's a bit of a stretch, I think, to be fair.
Oh, it's a wild stretch. I mean, just like saying that, you got some sort of substance in your normally legal supplements that you've been taking, how it mysteriously ended up there.
What's interesting is Jeff Heck hasn't really had much to say about this one.
No, he certainly has not. And I did like one point for Andrew Harris to come out, and this is the earliest I think we've ever talked about actual football on this podcast. This is weird, Joel. What the hell's going on? For Andrew Harris to come on out and say, oh, it must have been cross-contamination or whatever. It was Quinn Magnuson, former Rider, an occasional TV commentator here in Saskatoon, that came out and said, test the sample then. Or test the powder, or test whatever. I don't buy it. And I'm a Bombers fan. I don't buy it for a second.
Yeah, I think we'll get into this a little bit more after, in a little bit here, just because I think...
I'm just so angry about it. I'm so angry. I'm crushing... I got a little...
I'm not on the other perspective, and really, any player who tests positive these days, it doesn't really get to me anymore. I'm just like, whatever. And I'm not...
I'm angry as a Bomber fan.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not angry because he's a role model or any of this other bullshit. I'm just angry because my team is probably going to get their asses kicked by the team I talk about once a week with you.
And you went on CTV Morning Live in Saskatoon with your Bomber jersey on before you knew this information, right?
The best part was I literally, that news broke from the time I left the studio after being live on CTV on, what was that? That would have been Monday.
Yes.
That news broke from the time I got out of the studio into my Rogue to my house and went to go on Twitter because I noticed that I had been tweeted actually by Quinn once or twice. And the only other thing I think it was Devin Haru of CBC who actually ran into this weekend. I saw his tweet first about it and I just went, I tweeted out, and it's the one word we try not to say in this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I tweeted out the classic Bryan Cranston putting his hands up and just dropping the F-bomb gif. I'm like, that's how I felt. That is, I literally, before I went in to see my wife and kids, I just sat in my car and just dropped the F-bomb.
Yeah, I mean, That's entirely fair. So if we, in a roundabout way, if we really want to stretch this into something, the fact that you went on to a television program in Saskatchewan with a Bomber jersey, you may have just jinxed yourself with that one.
Oh, so what you're saying is when I put on my jersey that morning, somehow I altered the timeline that Andrew Harris ended up on the steroids. I get it. I'm a believer in that tinfoil hat. It's like my
it's far more likely than some shadowy figure at the CFL controlling the Riders' destiny.
My wardrobe controls the CFL more than anything.
Just in stuff that like you actually believe in, like, you know.
Fair.
Because we know every take you have tends to go like horribly sideways. So
it's wow. Am I like, whoa? Am I like the Neo of the CFL? Even the rain delayed game. My kids wouldn't go to sleep, and I thought I was going to miss the end of it, but instead I had already watched the end of it.
You saw the end before you knew it was the end.
Whoa, there is no spoon.
So yeah, we're obviously going to talk about Andrew Harris and the fact that he's going to miss what it looks like, unless there's some kind of appeal coming, for the Labor Day Classic and the Banjo Bowl, which is significant, obviously, especially since the Riders, the Bombers, will also be without Matt Nichols, and we're also going to get into a little interesting story on that. Specifically, Matt Nichols from former GM Brendan Taman, who had a column, as he does every week, in the Regina Leader-Post, and I would imagine it appears in the Star Phoenix as well. Talking about a trade he almost made back in 2015 that may have changed a lot of fortunes for a lot of people, maybe not in a good way for some. And we're obviously going to talk ahead about the Labor Day Classic and where the Riders stand, as this might become a bit of a thing with us right now, as they slashed Ottawa, as they should have eventually. There. It took a little while, like usual, but it got there. But in the meantime, John, what's in the glass this week?
Well, because sometimes you walk into your favorite liquor store and sometimes you see, oh, there's 24 beer on sale for $50. And sometimes you go, or I can buy two 15-packs for $50. And you go, I have $50. Even when I buy a quote-unquote generic beer, it is, of course, local. Just going with a classic 016, some little Great West, a couple long, golf shots away from my house here in Saskatoon. Can't go wrong. Mass-produced but local, right here in downtown Saskatoon, beside the Granite Curling Club, which has the best wonton soup you will ever have.
I think that's at least the second time you've mentioned that on this podcast.
That wonton soup is that good. Like maybe it's just because...
Are you being paid in wonton soup?
No, because then I would actually talk about the banh mi store that a friend of mine owns and a colleague of mine owns, and who also has good wonton soup. But I can tell you, but maybe, and just maybe, the only time I ever curl out of the Granite is usually the men's Bonspiel weekend in Saskatoon, when I'm usually drunk for most of the weekend. So it's like that saltiness and that savoriness after you've been drinking the whole night. That might be it. That might be why it tastes so good.
So the question is then, do you risk ruining what you know about it by going to try it without having a few beer first?
Hell no. Hell no.
That's a smart move, yeah.
Brewery's right next door. So I can just go and make of the beer and make of the soup and make of the curl.
That makes a lot of sense. So back in my younger days when I was in Ottawa and when I lived there, and there was the bar we went to all the time we were in college, and there was this pizza place next door that smartly stayed open till I think 3 a.m. on like Fridays and Saturdays for obvious reasons. You would close the bar and you'd roll out there, and then it would just be like full of people just grabbing pizza by the slice. And of course we always thought, I was like, oh, this pizza's amazing. Looking back on it, it probably wasn't, but you know what? It was 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. So, you know what? I've never really tried Willie's Pizza since, but they have expanded across the city a little bit, so it seems like that little pizza shop that they had there was a start of something for them, maybe. I don't really remember if it's actually good or not, because I don't think I'd had it without first going to that bar.
And you don't want to... Although, like, now I'm like... I feel like I'm curious. Like, I feel like if I ever had the opportunity to go to Ottawa, I'd have to try Willie's Pizza. sober and then report back to you whether it was, all that in a bag of chips to just not, potentially ruin it for you, gas man.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of other great pizza places in Ottawa where I could send you if you ever for some reason ended up there. I don't know why you'd be there, but
neither do I. But hey, maybe one day. I am from Ontario. Just those things kind of happen.
You're from Thunder Bay. That's like a different Ontario.
It is. It very much is. It very much is.
It's more like Eastern Manitoba.
That's why I remember when I first moved out west. This was 2006. I was in Lloydminster. And I used to tell people I was from Ontario. And no offense to you guys in Southern and Eastern Ontario, of course, you being genuinely one of the best human beings I know.
You know like 3 people, so that's,
That's fair. But of those 3, you're among the top. You're among the top tool on that one, Gas. And I used to just tell people I was from Manitoba because you tell people you're from Ontario, and I'm sure you've run into this, and people just assume you're an asshole.
Yeah, it happens sometimes, yeah.
Right? Like, especially here in Western Canada, you're like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Ontario. And you're from Ontario, from the center of the universe. And then they don't. I honestly, for the first year I lived in Lloydminster, told people I was from Manitoba.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I very much feel like I am from Eastern Manitoba.
That's really what it should be. I like Northern Ontario, and they have their own curling team. They've always had the men's, and now they have the women's and the the Scotties and the Briar too. Hashtag 8N Nation, because they always are kind of their own little province. There just isn't really enough people or really like a hub to really justify it being an actual 11th province.
Exactly.
So it's got to go somewhere, and for some reason they decided Ontario instead of maybe Manitoba. I don't know. They probably could have split along the line there somewhere and done halvesies on it, but
right, which would probably put my hometown in Eastern Manitoba and then Thunder Bay in Ontario. This is confusing.
Well, for me, I'm drinking the Pile of Bones Hibiscus Lime Goza. Saskatchewan Roughriders are now 6-3 on the season. Their 5th straight win against the Ottawa Red Blacks. The first time they've won 5 games in a row since the start of the 2014 season, which really brought back some flashbacks and some memories. And we are almost pretty much now at the 5-year anniversary of the day this franchise pretty much went in the tank for a few years.
Yes.
Which is crazy to think that it was 5 years ago in a couple of weeks was the play that Dan Clark and the offensive line did not hear the whistle that clearly went, but it was so loud at IGF you can't blame them for it. And Darian Durant got his elbow exploded. And then Chris Cuthbert had he had the infamous quote that is the Riders' season's hopes walking out the door or whatever it was, and people were furious at the time about him saying that, and he was right.
Oh yeah. But we all knew it back then. The backup quarterback situation was not good at all. But you're right. It seems so close yet so far away that Durant's elbow exploded.
Yeah, and it's weird now, though. Here we are 5 years later now, and it feels like finally the franchise has recovered from that. And I know there was the Achilles heel in Game 1 the next season that kind of just exacerbated the whole problem. And if that doesn't happen, maybe it's an entirely different story of Darian Durant, and that at the end of that era. But effectively, looking back on it, that game was the end of that sort of 2007 to 2014 era of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And here we are now, basically 5 years later, and I think it's safe to say now that they've finally recovered from it. There's been enough of a rebuild, the pieces are in place, and they found Cody Fajardo. They finally found their quarterback that they've been looking for since Darian Durant got hurt. And as you know, in the CFL and in football, it's hard to find a quarterback, so the fact that they got it now, in every season sacred, now is the time for them to really, I think, build on this and try and regain that form that we saw in 12 and 13, and maybe start the start of something new 5 years later after the sort of the previous era end, and there was kind of this weird lost generation in between. Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right, and I think this is going to be the team to do it. You mentioned the 5 straight wins, and you mentioned, all the things like Cody Fajardo, who we obviously both like as a person and genuinely seem to have a bit of a bro crush on. But, it seems like this is, last year was putting the pieces in place on defense. Mm-hmm. This year, the offense is there, and it seems to be all catching up. And you're right, it does seem to be the start
a new era, out of the dark days of not being able to find a quarterback and the Tino Sinceri days, and coaxing Kerry Joseph out of retirement for the 17th time, and all that kind of stuff, right? Like I have a hard time, especially right now with the injuries and issues in Winnipeg. You'd have a hard time convincing me that Saskatchewan is not the best team in the CFL right now. And it's been a long time since that era that you talked about, the Durant era, the 07 till 2014 era. It's been a long time since you could say that about the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Yeah, even in for a good chunk of that era, they were always kind of thought of, second or third, maybe, kind of thing, right? There's always a team statistically that was better than them. You could argue probably those 08, 09 teams, or 9-10, whatever it was, that went back-to-back Grey Cups were better than the team that won in 2013. It just didn't come together at the end, basically.
No, and you're absolutely right. But and I look at this season, and I look at the lack of teams that Edmonton has beat, and then you couldn't beat a Winnipeg team with a quarterback that completed 7 passes. Mm-hmm. Calgary, especially without Bo Levi Mitchell, has taken a step back, and Winnipeg is, without a suspended Andrew Harris and without Matt Nichols, and although still very good, like...
Yeah, we'll get into the X factor there that could still single-handedly win them in a football game in a second.
Oh, absolutely. When we're talking about the Labor Day Classic, but this season as a whole, and it's funny, when the CFL.ca power rankings had them 6th last week, which was completely asinine, which was stupid, just simply stupid. The fact is, this might be the second best, at worst, the second best football team in the CFL right now.
Yeah, that's on the 3 Down Nation power rankings this week, which as of the time of this recording have not been released yet, so I don't know where the final tally stood. There's still a lot of variation, but yeah, I had the Riders 2nd for me. I still put Winnipeg 1, it just felt right still for some reason, because I think that defense is good enough to still win some games. Yeah, it could change in a hurry, and that's just kind of the way the picture has gone. I think Calgary's a team that can certainly shoot up quickly if they beat Edmonton this week, and I think that will definitely send a signal about the Eskimos if they lose to Calgary this week as well. Right. But the interesting thing, and this is what we talked about a little bit about, and everyone said, well, who have the Riders beaten? Well, okay, yeah, their schedule's been fairly light so far, and they got the best team they had to face is Hamilton, and it was their first game without Jeremiah Mazzoli, not Josiah St. John. And so there's a bit of a leeway there, and their offense kind of hasn't been great since Mazzoli went down. Dane Evans hasn't quite panned out as expected just yet. He may get there, but there's certainly some work for Evans to be done. So yeah, who have they beaten? But to me, what I look at is, other than the first 2 games, the first 2 weeks of the season are always a wash. Doesn't matter who you play, doesn't matter where they end up. There's just none of that matters. So yeah, Ottawa had a freak game against them earlier in the year. You can't really hold that against them. No. Beyond that, okay, yeah, they've played BC twice, and they played Toronto, and they just played Ottawa. But you know what? They didn't just beat them. They crushed those teams to dust, essentially. And I know the first game against BC felt closer than it was, but realistically, none of those teams really ever had a chance in those football games. And when you are a good team like are the Riders against Ottawa last week, that's what you have to do, and that's what they did. And we've seen this team be good at times and still lose to bad football teams. Now it appears they're good, and they're actually beating the bad football teams.
Well, and that's what good teams should do. And it's funny that, all as good as Winnipeg's been this year, let's not forget they didn't do their job against the Toronto Argonauts and lost to Toronto, even with Andrew Harris and Matt Nichols in the lineup, right? Like that to me, like, you never in Calgary's heyday, and that may not be over yet. Calgary's still a great organization, a great team. Mm-hmm. But you never really saw the Stamps lose to a team that was, far below them.
No.
And that, to me, is what you're starting to see of this Rider team. As you mentioned, like that Ottawa game, it was never in doubt. Those 2 games against BC, never in doubt. Like, there was not a single moment that you went, oh, shit, this could go sideways. It was just, this is dominance. Mm-hmm. Like, this is, and you can tell, too, and it's funny, there's a different atmosphere in the stands at Mosaic when everybody in that place knows their team's going to win. It is such a party, and that place just gets brought to another level, and I think that weirdly helps. But when the crowd has confidence and the team has confidence, and it all just kind of comes together, like, and that's what they're doing. Like, they are doing their job. and they are blowing these teams out, and I look forward to seeing them. Like, normally, like, if Edmonton has been exposed a little bit from playing weak teams, I think Saskatchewan has used weak teams to get themselves sharper, to get themselves ready for when you are going to see now, okay, a very talented Winnipeg Blue Bombers team 3 times here coming up, right?
Yeah.
You know, you got Calgary coming up. You've got the good teams coming up. And normally you're going, oh, is this going to sustain? Is this going to still... I think they're ready. I think they're ready for the chance. I think they needed that a little bit because of the, you know, they had a bit of a tumultuous offseason with losing a few key players and then Chris Jones leaving. To me, this team is trending upwards, and it's upwards at the right time.
Yeah, I think that's an entirely fair point. And how much last year did we talk about the way they were winning, if it was sustainable, right? With how it was the defense week after week after week after week. And this year, they're winning the football game a lot of different ways. And that's really important. So, last week aside, where Dom Davis decided he was just going to throw it to anyone who was open, no matter what color jersey they were wearing. They haven't really relied on that splashy play so much defensively. Sure, they've made a few recently, and you need those to win football games every once in a while. But they're still doing a few things on offense. I think the offense has slowed down a little bit from where it was, but that's been fine. They haven't needed it to, because when you go up 20-0 in the first quarter of a football game, naturally things kind of die off a little bit, and you felt the energy in the crowd go out, and the game kind of hit a wall for a while there. And what I found really interesting about this, and this is not the first time this has happened to this team either, they get out to a bit of a lead against these bad teams, and so they naturally you kind of let off the pedal a little bit, and you think it's going to be a breeze, and then all of a sudden we've seen, BC had 2 kick return touchdowns. BC, the first game, was kind of close at the half, even though they were kind of in it, but not really. And then this game against Ottawa, they had that touchdown pass to Rhymes with about a couple minutes to go in the half. And these are all moments where sometimes when a bad team is kind of getting the shit beat out of them, that suddenly things maybe turn around a little bit in a game that's closer than it should be. The Riders haven't let the other team do that, which is very important to kind of make a note of, because it's easy to sometimes let a team hang around a little bit when they shouldn't, and more often than not, that team comes back to win. The Riders haven't really done that this year. They've been able to remain mentally strong and focused and say, okay, let's get back at her, because I believe in the second half after that touchdown, Ottawa only mustered up 2 more field goals the rest of the game. So as close as it felt at times, they locked it down after that one touchdown and said, no, okay, we're awake now. We're good. Don't worry.
Yeah, and the thing is with this team compared to last year's team that you and I talked about so much, that the offense couldn't win them a game if their life depended on it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, and although we haven't really had to see it yet, I feel like this Rider team would be capable of winning a shootout, of winning a blow for blow. And I don't see it happening with the Rider defense, but
I don't really see it. I don't really see it the way all of the top teams in this league kind of play now. They're all pretty good on defense, and they're all, shall we say, fairly conservative on offense, except for Winnipeg sometimes tries some different things. And we're seeing Kahari Jones do some wild things out of Montreal, which is amazing. But beyond that, every offense is kind of similar in this league right now.
It's true, but I mean, I could see a guy like Kahari try to pull out all the stops in a game against Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like they could win that game. I feel like if either Paul LaPolice or Kahari Jones, I have a feeling that in the Labor Day Classic or the Banjo Bowl, you're going to see every single gadget play Paul LaPolice has ever dreamed up on the back of a napkin while with his buddies drinking at 2 a.m.
He might need it, so.
Well, that's it. I feel like he's going to need it. I feel like one of these 3 games, you're going to see it. But I feel like the Rider offense is good enough this year that if Winnipeg can score, can get some big gains on some gimmicky design plays and things like that, that the Rider offense can go, yeah, Fajardo.
Yeah.
And just march down the field and do their job. And William Powell and the receiving core,
Wow.
I think I died a little on that sneeze.
Hopefully no one was listening too loud on that one. Jeez.
Yeah, no, jeez. Just glad I didn't wake any of the kids up. I just feel like this offense, if Craig Dickinson needs them to go out and win them a football game, they can. That defense is as good as last year. Although, like this schematically, they're not. They're just. You and I talked about it all year. They have the talent.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be a little bit more vanilla of a look, but they're going to bring it together, and that they have. Like it just. I feel like the more I think about it, the more I watch them just kick the asses of these subpar teams. That it's hard to not think of them as the best team in the CFL right now.
Yeah, and I think that's an entirely fair point, and I think we're really going to find out for sure. I think it's safe to say that they're top 4 for sure, no matter what happens over the next couple of weeks. But over the next couple of weeks, if somehow, and I don't think they will because it's incredibly tough to do, and I know we say this every year, and for the last few years they have, I don't think they're going to sweep both games. I think they'll probably, in all likelihood, as usual, win this one and lose the next one. And because that's just the way it kind of goes. And that third game is going to be very interesting with Matt Nichols potentially. Well, he probably won't be back, but Andrew Harris will be back, and that will make a big difference. So that third game will be really interesting. So where does this stand right now then? So it's the Riders and the Bombers. It's the Labor Day Classic. It's the biggest, game of the regular season before October, when we really get into, the grind and the push toward the playoff. And, it has the recipe for at least the Labor Day Classic, considering the Bombers are without their 2 best players on offense, and arguably without a guy who, before the suspension, was probably the MOP favorite in the league, in my opinion. Wow, you would think the recipe there should be, okay, the Riders should win this game fairly easily, but, it's Labor Day and it's Winnipeg, and there's still good football players around there. And when you don't really know for sure still what a quarterback is going to do, that still makes your life difficult. And so there's going to be a lot of different things that the Bombers are still going to be able to throw at the Riders. I think the Bombers' best course of action in this game is going to have to be, obviously a low-scoring affair, which I think the Riders will also be fine with, because they'll be able to get in there and get their defense going. But really, and this is not a hot take alert whatsoever, the best chances of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers winning this game are what we saw last week and what we saw a lot in Saskatchewan last year, and that's where Willie Jefferson just becomes an unstoppable wrecking ball.
Oh, yeah, and he looked like that last week against Edmonton, and that is the one X factor that Winnipeg has. Now, I will say, with all the praise I've heaped upon the Riders and how I do think that right now they are the best team in the CFL, if Winnipeg comes out and wins Labor Day, because we know that is the most hostile environment the Blue Bombers will see until probably a road playoff game the entire year. Yeah. They are without their quarterback. They are without their top running back for reasons I talked about off the top of the show that I don't necessarily believe him. I think his excuse is bullshit. But again, I'm not really surprised. I just think if Winnipeg comes out and soundly wins this game, the argument, it is their Grey Cup to lose. The argument that anybody else should even be considered for the best team in the CFL is moot. It's over. If Winnipeg, without those 2 guys, can win and win handedly, the Riders are the second best team in the CFL. Stop, end story. The Bombers are clearly on top, right? That's what I like about this, is that I still think you're right. There's enough talent in that Winnipeg team. I'm not counting on a blowout.
No.
I'm counting on the Riders winning. I'm counting on the Riders winning by maybe a couple of scores. I'm counting on, I am by everything we've watched this season, the Riders facing a Winnipeg team without Nichols and Harris should win both games the next 2 weeks, period. But there is enough talent on that Bomber team to go, okay, if they do, I don't think it's going to be easy.
No. And frankly, Willie Jefferson is used to carrying teams to victory that have no offense. So
which is unbelievable.
This is not new.
Lineman.
Yeah, he's just a freak of nature, and I know we talked about him a ton on this podcast last year. And watching that game last week against Edmonton, I was like, oh, man, I miss watching Willie Jefferson every week. Especially now that we're heading into peak Willie Jefferson season. Charleston Hughes is the first half guy. Willie Jefferson is the second half guy, and he's entering his zone now, and he's just going to be dominant probably for the next number of weeks, and it's just going to be so fun to watch. I almost wish you could invent a rule right now where you could go back maybe even a few years and say, okay, Willie Jefferson, you're not allowed to play for the same team more than 2 years in a row, just so all 9 fan bases in this league get to experience at least a season of you on their team. That is just how incredible he is to watch.
Well, and you and I have both talked about now that after years of being in the media, we kind of cheer for guys to succeed, no matter where they are. We've talked about what we like out of Cody Fajardo, and I even, reminisced back to my days of interviewing Weston Dressler and realizing I was taller than him, and like I liked interviewing those guys, right? And I didn't really get the chance to talk to Willie Jefferson much, but just he is such a freak. He's such an athlete. He's so fun to watch, and I mean, as a guy that watches damn near every single Riders game and damn near every single Bombers game, unless I'm stuck at work or something like that, it's watching him. It's just it's pure domination, and it's not something you see out of a D lineman to create like there's lots of very good D linemen. 2 of them play for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but you don't see them take over a game in the way that Willie Jefferson does with all the things he can do. And you're right, it's a treat. It's a treat for the next 2 weeks here to watch him against his old team, and it's going to be great.
It's going to be a lot of fun. A former team. It's going to be a lot of fun. A guy who could have been on the other side of this, as we learned recently, is Matt Nichols. And people might be saying, what? There's an interesting column. So if you don't know, former Rider GM Brendan Taman writes a column for the Leader Post in the Star of Phoenix every week. And usually at the end of it, him and Rob Vanstone do their predictions for the week, blah, 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 blah. I don't read it that often, but it caught my attention this week because it said something along the lines of the trade he talks about the trade he almost made. And I was like, what? Well, this is interesting. Now you got my attention. That's what I want to know. I don't want to know what you think about the league currently. I mean, we all have our opinions on the league currently, and that's great. I want to know what you tried to do as GM of this team. And he goes back to the week before that infamous game in Ottawa in 2015 where Brett Smith started, was bad, and then got pulled for Tino Sinceri, and the fan base lost their minds. And I just remember that game went to hell in a handbasket very quickly. It was one, I believe, where I had a picture of it at the time, just the most asinine defensive court lineup I'd ever seen. Like John Chick was alone in the middle, and everyone else was it was 5 yards away from him on either side, and Henry Burris was like, okay, I'm going to check down to William Powell or whoever was running back at the time, and we're going to run for a touchdown. And it happened so easily because it was basically the running back versus John Chick one-on-one.
Yes.
It was essentially what the play was. And I was just like, oh my goodness, this is the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen in my life. So anyway, had the Riders won that game, which we learned as that game went on, there was never a chance.
No.
GM Brendan Taman was that week talking to another team about potentially adding a quarterback because he felt had the team moved to 0-9, they would need a shakeup. And Craig Reynolds agreed, obviously.
Yes, right.
And for him, a shakeup for a football team either means a change GM. Well, he's not going to fire himself. A coaching change. He didn't really get into whether that was really on his agenda or not. Or a quarterback change. And we all could agree that Rider team needed a quarterback change.
Oh my goodness, yes. Brett the Winemaker Smith and Tino 2-and-out Sinceri.
Yeah. And so he tells a bit of a back tale. He was at Dallas Cowboys camp in 2012. Was scouting a quarterback, but he was already on some other team's neg list, so he was out of the picture at the time. Then during that 2015 season, the week before that game in Ottawa, he's in talks with the general manager at the time to try and acquire a quarterback from a team, but he says, okay, well, we'll revisit this after the next game. That was Brendan Taman's last game. So he's in the office the next day, and stuff's happening, and it looks like everything's you could tell something's up, and then he gets let go, and then he goes back to his office to clean his desk, and there's a post-it note on his desk with the initial CC for Corey Chamberlain, so he was obviously going to have a discussion with Corey Chamberlain about something that day. Mm-hmm. And the other was MN. So he was obviously going to revisit a trade that could have sent Matt Nichols to the Saskatchewan Roughriders just ahead of the Labor Day Classic in 2015.
And see, that's interesting because the butterfly, the ripple effect that would have had on the team.
Oh, it'd be massive. It'd be massive.
You and I were talking
the
about
effect on both teams would have just been so big going forward.
Not only both teams, but also I think the Edmonton Eskimos, who of course brought Matt Nichols up. And you and I were talking before we started recording, let's not forget that Matt Nichols beat Mike Riley for the starter's job, and the only reason Mike Riley ended up with the starter's job is because Matt Nichols, I believe it was his ankle or his knee or something, just completely exploded one game, and he missed basically the entire year, leading to the rise of Mike Riley. Now, what does that do to Winnipeg with no Matt Nichols to obtain for nothing? Because
because Matt Nichols is already in Edmonton at this point, right?
Right. Yes. But still, you're right. He's already in Edmonton. This is a guy that taken the job from Mike Riley, and that the Riders look to go get. Maybe he doesn't become Winnipeg property. Maybe Winnipeg stays in the dark ages. Maybe Brett Smith becomes the quarterback for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and maybe, just maybe, Stephen LaForce comes out of retirement.
And maybe Sergio never plays for the Bombers. I mean, we're really, you don't know how the butterfly effect works. And so the interesting thing is,
I can't live in that reality.
Yeah,
I don't even mention that reality.
So obviously that move would have dramatically altered the Bombers' future. I don't know if it would have dramatically altered the Riders' future, though, because that offensive line was not good. And it wasn't good for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years after that fact, until it actually it was partway through last season when you finally started to feel a little confident in the offensive line again. So had Brendan Taman actually pulled that trade off, yes, Matt Nichols would have been a better quarterback than Brett Smith or Tino Sinceri or Seth Daggy or whoever else was on that roster at the time.
Oh, Seth
Daggy, right?
Yes, there's a reference.
Daggy days. But so he would have been better. He would have given them maybe a little bit more of a shot. But I really feel like Matt Nichols would have been Drew Willied, and it would have altered his career in a way that is not good. And ultimately, it probably wouldn't have ended up saving Brendan. He would have bought Brendan Taman maybe the rest of that season, maybe one more year, depending on how things went. But it certainly wouldn't have. I don't think it would have greatly extended his time in Saskatchewan. I don't think it would have allowed Matt Nichols to become the quarterback he has today in Winnipeg, because I think he's very much a quarterback of circumstance that landed in the right place at the right time for him to flourish. Yes. Because if he went into a bad situation like that Rider team was, I don't think he would have been able to lead them to any kind of significant victories.
Matt Nichols is a very good quarterback when he has a very good offensive line.
Mm-hmm. And in fairness, that is a lot of quarterbacks. We're not, this is not a knock against him.
No, you're absolutely right. I think he's better than a lot of guys when his offensive line is good, but he's not the kind of guy that can, create, that can scramble, that can move in the pocket real well. He needs the good O-line, right?
Save that at least a good running back, which he's also had in Winnipeg.
Well, exactly, right? Which, now Winnipeg is without a running back because, he's on steroids, although Chris Streveler might be the best option at running back. Like, at some point, does Winnipeg just put Chris Streveler at running back and roll out their third stringer for Labor Day? Is that a terrible idea?
I don't know. Can they do that? I know you have to have at least one quarterback on the field at all times. We learned that last year when the Riders had Nick Marshall as running the short yardage option, but still had to run Brandon Bridge or whoever out to the wide receiver spot because the quarterback had to be on the field.
Right. That's right. One of those goofy CFL roster rules. So, yeah. But what happens if you have two quarterbacks out there? Does it just mean get bonus points?
Probably not. No.
Listen, I'm looking for any kind of angle that can help Winnipeg this weekend. I just know it's not going to be good, and I'm going to be surrounded by my Rider fan in-laws and probably very drunk dealing with the fact that Winnipeg's getting shit stumped.
I mean, we'll see. We talked about Willie Jefferson, and you never really know what might happen in these kinds of games. And I think
I just got a bad. I know my logic, podcaster brain, talking to you about it. It feels good, but as we continue discussing this, I keep going I just feel like something bad is going to happen.
Well, I mean, given your track record, you could be hedging your bets here, and by believing that something bad is going to happen, perhaps something good is actually going to happen.
It's like when I double reverse jinxed Van Stone last week.
Which I believe he never properly thanked you for. I did mention it on Twitter.
That's right. I expected a Safeway cake as a present with candles that said, "Thank you for reverse jinxing me, Fraser." New Twitter follower, Rob Van Stone, thank you. I'll expect my cake in the mail.
Mail cake? Do you really want cake in the mail?
Yeah, I want cake at all times.
But in the mail, Do you really trust Canada Post to send you cake and not, like, mash it?
Fair, but at least then I wouldn't feel like such a pig. It's like, oh, I totally didn't eat most of this cake in disgusting fashion. It showed up that way because it's a Canada Post. I'd have a scapegoat for being a glutton.
Well, you already have one. It's called the Grey Cup Grease Up.
Oh, that's right. Oh. You know what? Oh, I had a great Grey Cup Grease Up on Sunday, Joel.
Yeah.
I got a little drunk Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
As we bid adieu to, and also I think this is the reason he got the job.
Right, we were supposed to mention this.
Yeah, we were, and now it's just coming up. I love how organically this podcast moves. Pat Mackay, the two-time who was filling in for you while you were off all gallivanting in Europe and stuff. Pat Mackay is off to be the sports director of CTV Winnipeg, a role that you and I are pretty sure he got because of his appearances on our podcast.
I mean, there's no evidence to suggest otherwise. I think it's
That's
literally the difference maker because he's been doing that job for how long, and all of a sudden he appears on this podcast and gets this job. I mean, come on.
Boom. 10 years in Saskatoon. Next thing you know, sports director Winnipeg, wubba lubba dub dub. All of a sudden, it's clearly the podcast is the variable. So, anyways, eat a hot dog and wings that night while drinking a whole bunch of beer with him and some other friends. Get up the next morning. I had a greasy egg McMuffin.
Nice.
That night, I was so lazy, I ate 2 Whoppers as well. It was peak grease up. It was peak grease up. Then today, I'm randomly sitting at my desk when one of my coworkers offered me a pizza. I already ate lunch, but Grey Cup Grease Up. Might as well get into it. Free pizza.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue. Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.